This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. Okay. Well, great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Susan Dean and I'm hosting today's webinar on behalf of the New Brunswick Association of Planners. Our session today is a follow-up webinar on hosting difficult meetings, and it's entitled, Who Are These People and Why Are They Yelling at Me? The You Are on Mute edition. So we had our first session in June of last year, and it focused on how to handle challenging public engagement events. And almost a year later, we are now solidly into our COVID experience and online meetings. Including public engagement sessions, they're completely the norm. So dogs barking in the background and kids asking for snacks are no longer embarrassing or unexpected. We're just into a whole new world. And today's session is aimed at helping us explore online public engagement and learning what's been working over the past year. So I'll introduce our presenter in just a moment, but first a few housekeeping points. So today's session provides 1 CPL credit for those planners who are logging their professional development hours. So the session is now available on the Canadian Institute of Planners CPL webpage. For the format today, Dave will touch on it, but as an overall kind of idea of how we'll approach today's session. So there'll be 2 10-minute presentations, each respectively followed by 20-minute discussion periods. So for those discussion periods, our goal is to have you talking to each other. And what we'll do is, with the number of people here, we'll take your mics off mute. You can turn your mics on and off and join us. And the way of kind of raising your hand and joining the discussion will get you to turn your camera on. So if I see your camera go on, I'll understand that I can call on you and that you have ideas to share, feedback, or experiences to share with the group. So lastly, for housekeeping pieces, you may have heard us at the start there, this session is being recorded. So moving forward, I would like to introduce our presenter, Dave Hardy. He's an author, a professional planner, and an extreme facilitator. So Dave joins us today from Toronto, Ontario, where he has his own firm. Before becoming a professional planner and starting his firm, Dave cut his teeth as a community organizer. He has deep empathy for communities and stakeholders he worked with. So to date, Dave has facilitated over 1,500 meetings, actually, and counting. It's probably much more than that now. And he's directly experienced what goes right and wrong when difficult public decisions need to be made by politicians, governments, agencies, and corporations. He's learned a lot about how to successfully engage the public, how to foster dialogue, and how to manage situations when members of the public are angry. He's also seen the political and financial costs of public engagement being done poorly. So there's certainly a lot to be learned from Dave's years of experience. Let's get started. Welcome, Dave, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. And also welcome everybody this afternoon. Happy to be speaking to you again. For those of you who may be new, as Susan was said, this is a follow-up presentation based on kind of the core of my book. For those of you who aren't new and perhaps have purchased and read the book, I'd be happy to take any questions, since this follow-up presentation was intended to take questions as you went out there and engaged with the public face-to-face. Next slide, please. I'm going to do a bit of a recap, so I'll let you read the slide, but obviously the circumstances have changed. Instead of going and talking to people face-to-face and trying to get dialogue, we are now all pretty well online. So I wanted to focus on what does that online dialogue look like, and share some lessons, and then we can talk about how to get best practice. So in reality, we may be online for some time, and we need to really, as planners, make sure we have always increasing skills. Next slide, please. I'm not an expert in the technology. I'm a facilitator, but I have been doing an awful lot of virtual online facilitation over the last year. And so I do want to share a few observations, and doing so, also hear from you and what you're seeing, so we can learn from each other. The way I've scoped out the webinar is basically there's 2 very short presentations, 10 minutes, and then 20 minutes for us to talk to each other. I wanted to start with the biggest challenges, and I'll share my experiences, and then I'm hoping to get your experiences, and we can talk about those challenges. And then second is the best practices. So the bigger question here is that as these meetings are now part of the democratic and public engagement process, what might we do to improve dialogue? Next slide, please. So the core of being a facilitator or a moderator on these meetings has changed somewhat, but there's still the core of we want to help people to share information, perhaps ourselves as we're planners or our partners or team members, to share that information with the public and try to build understanding. We need to learn and continue to learn, and as we do, we improve our decisions because we are hearing different points of view, and our members of the public are hearing different points of view, which ultimately allows us to make better decisions. And also, the role is to continue to maintain trust in the democratic process. And in my book, I talk a lot about building trust and confidence and some of the criteria that you may want to think about. But the core ones, which I'm kind of touch base on for virtual facilitation, is transparency, traceability, accountability, inclusiveness, and timeliness. So there's some of the key ones that I always think about as I design a virtual process. Are we kind of meeting those? So, and also this is not geared to team meetings or meetings where you can't expect somebody to pull a fire alarm. This is meetings where issues may be hotly debated in a virtual setting. So that's kind of the focus or the twist of this particular session. Next, please. So in terms of facilitation of potentially angry public meetings, I'm going to split it in terms of two things. One is presenter's view. So if you're a presenter, you're a planner or a professional and you have to present, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing? And then I'm going to twist it around to the public's view. If you're a member of the public, what are you seeing from the presenter that might kind of get you shorts and not? As you can see, I got the slide here of everybody's been asked to do the Vulcan hand signal, and they're not going to get it, and quickly they're all going to be frustrated. So anyways, next slide. So if you're a presenter, I've got about 10 things that I've noted over the last year in terms of what kind of rattles presenters. And so a couple things. One is the prevalence of discussion bombing. Again, when if Zoom or you leave chat on or somebody comes in and they're quite disruptive that perhaps weren't invited. So that's probably number one. And number two is, I found it interesting, is presentations being sidelined by what's going on in chat. I had one meeting where we had the presenters, they decided to have an open chat open to the public, and the issue was really hot. And people were fighting so much in chat with, typing in and comments and hosing comments that the whole team was more focused on chat than they were on the presenter. So it kind of sidelined it. In terms of protest images, again, one meeting where the public decided to, instead of having their face appear I'm not sure it was a Zoom call or a Teams call, but instead of having their face appear, they converted their faces into protest signs. So when the camera was turned on to see who's there, they had all these protest signs. So the tech person ended up just eliminating them for the sake of allowing the presenter to go through without kind of having a look at protest signs. Number four, I've witnessed kind of oppositional groups demanding to see a record of all external and internal chats. So when that happens, particularly at the very beginning, you're starting to present, thinking that everybody's going to listen to you and want to hear your remarks, but instead they're challenging you from minute one, on process. And so they're coming at you with an attitude. And so you're thinking, I have to present this information, but I also have to respond to some very early challenges. Next, not really knowing how many people are on the call. So sometimes there's hundreds, and so I've had a couple. I have not had a meeting with 1,000. Certainly had meetings with hundreds, but I've had co-facilitators that have had thousands on the call. Like, who are these people? And then how do you really engage them is a real challenge. With number 6, with large meetings, it's really hard to know who you're presenting to. And I always like to know that before I have my presenters present, so I can have a sense of what the reception is going to be to their comments. Do you have a bunch of politicians? Do you have media? Do you have supporters? Do you have people opposed, and so on? So it's very hard to know sometimes. Next slide, please. Number 7, through screen capture, any member of the public can make your poorly thought through response in chat or with recording your kind of too casual comment, a permanently recorded remark. So forever, you're redocumented, and what you said is going to be available. So you have to be very careful in terms of what you're saying. Number 8, depending on your virtual architecture, it may be very hard to create a safe space for people with minority views. Again, there's some architecture where you know clearly who's presenting that remark. And if they are perhaps somebody who wants a more balanced or a nuanced comment to go out there when everybody else is quite opposed, that can be a threatening situation for them. So there's still that potential of suppressing those people that don't feel that they're in safe places. Number 9 is, again, as a facilitator, I'm always looking for, like, who's quiet, who do I need to hear from, who I'm not hearing from, particularly those in the face-to-face meetings. So with virtual, it's online meetings are not introvert friendly. So you as a moderator facilitator, you need to start thinking, or continue to think, who are those representative voices, who am I not hearing from, and how do I reach out to them? And finally, in my book, I talk a lot about body language, facial language, gestures, because reading body and facial language is a huge part of understanding what's really on people's minds. In the virtual setting, you're really not going to get that. You're going to see some of that from people's face, but if they have a challenging or probing question, it could simply be that. I really want to know deeply what you're saying, but it could be, face-to-face, meaning seem to be very friendly, whereas in a virtual meeting, you just don't have. Next, please. So I'm going to finish this part by talking about, okay, so that was the perspective, is if you're a presenter, some of the things that you're dealing with you're dealing with these really emotional meetings. As a participant, here's the things that you're seeing. First of all, we all know about the issues of bandwidth and lack of internet access. I was on a meeting last night where it was about 1,000 miles north of here, maybe 1,500 miles, way up in northern remote Ontario, where they were just thrilled because they all are starting to get Starlink. So they're getting really good internet access as a result of that. So I was really happy to see that, because that was the first time I saw that when I particularly dealing with northern and remote communities. There's also the digital divide that varies by age, culture, urban, rural. We normally, when we started out with the virtual meetings, we were actually, because we're getting a lot of seniors, having to do a training program in advance to tell people, well, there's a menu bar at the bottom, and this is how you raise your hand, and so on, just to get people up to speed. I think a lot of people have kind of started to learn a lot more, but even, again, for a meeting I'm having next week, they're a rural community, they don't have good internet access, so we're having to hand out the PowerPoint slides ahead of time, just to make sure that they can be involved. And particularly if you're on by phone, it's even more challenging. Next, please. More frustrations if you're a participant. Certainly, proponents not acknowledging or answering unwanted or uncomfortable questions. So again, I've seen that where I'm facilitating, my client is kind of cherry picking what questions they want to ask. I know the members of the public are quite frustrated like that. And not knowing if there's minutes going to be kept. More recently, a lot of my clients are saying, fine, I'm just going to record the whole thing, and we're going to post the recording on web and everybody can see everything, but that doesn't always occur. And I've had some clients that don't want meetings to be recorded. Also seeing that the client is checking who's who wants to become involved in the meeting and making a decision whether or not they're allowing certain groups to come in. So there's rigid, say overly rigid control of the waiting room. So if you're a member of the public, that's a challenge. Next slide, please. Another is it's always nice to know who's on the call, and so there's a process that I've seen used, and these are kind of worst case, but turning off the cameras of participants, just having a panel of people so that nobody knows who's on the call or not, who's asking questions or not. Also, participants experiencing a lack of transparency, like who's behind the presenter, what organizations are being involved, and that's face-to-face, that's fundamental to sound participation. When I'm doing a face-to-face meeting, I always make sure that if there's somebody kind of in the room with a suit, that they're going to be introduced, and so everybody gets to know who they are. So you can't see the participants, you often can't see the questions or comments in chat. Next, please. So I finished the first kind of challenges section, and again, I kind of picked out some of the more the things I've seen over the last year that have been really a challenge. It's not always like that, of course, but some of the questions I want to pose to you right now are have you experienced challenges? What are those greatest challenges in terms of interacting with the public in a virtual forum? When you knew that or were doing that, did you develop a plan? What part of the plan worked and what didn't? And are there areas of good practice that you've learned about in, say, in face-to-face meetings that you've also been able to use in virtual meetings? So I'm happy to take any of those questions or none, but I'd like to hear from you so we can share our ideas on what have been the most challenging parts of virtual meetings. And Susan, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Great points. And now we look forward to hearing from all of you. So again, the approach that we'll take, if you have a comment to make, please turn your camera on, and I'll see that as raising your hand, and I'll call on you. I realize I've got we have 34 people on the call, which is absolutely wonderful, and we're hoping to still be able to engage in discussion. So this will be a lot of fun. Gordon Smith.
Hi there. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually taking a training course next week on how to present digitally, because I'm a pretty good presenter live, but I found presenting digitally really a challenge, because I think I rely a lot on the body language and the reaction you're getting from people and knowing who they are. So that's the major thing I've found, is that sort of the skills I had as a real life presenter haven't translated well into the virtual form. And I think I'm hoping to learn some stuff, but one of the things I think that I did learn is going in with a better scripted presentation. I tend to speak a little bit more off the cuff and speak to my slides, but I think my experience with a few of these is to be really well scripted, so I really know what I'm talking about and kind of staying online, because I'm not getting that feedback. In terms of area of good practice, what I found really, really good is I'm in Nova Scotia, so our Department of Environment did a session, and they had one person who was presenting and another person who was paying attention to the chat box, and you could put your questions in there. And so they kind of had this, and they stopped periodically throughout the presentation, like every 2 or 3 slides. Any questions? Like, how's that? Oh, I see here's some questions in the chat box. You know, did we get that right? To the person who maybe asked it. They named the person who asked it. So I found that like really well organized, and I really felt that it allowed some good participation. And the other thing that I found really, really good as well is like if you're looking to sort of ask through the group or whatever, or you're doing introductions, that the leader of the meeting says, okay, John, can you go first? And then Bill, can you go next? And so that you're not kind of waiting there and, oh, who's going to talk? You know, it's a little bit more directive of when, if there's a general question that everybody's expected to answer in a way that it's directed. Can you answer that? Can you answer that? Can you answer that? And it kind of just makes it flow and make sure everybody has their chance. But yeah, it's way different than doing it live.
Thanks, Gordon. How about others? What have you found? If you found that this is good practice as well? terms of what Gordon's been saying?
Hi, Mark. Please go ahead. So Mark Reed, and what we'll do actually is we'll get you to introduce yourself. So perhaps say what province you're in and where you're working from. We'll do a little getting to know you as we go. So please go ahead, Mark. And you may be on mute. Oh. I'm unable to hear you. Let's get you to keep trying here. Can you raise your hand if you're trying out different? Oh, we've lost you. Okay. Sometimes, oh, did you do the turn it off, turn it on trick? That's great.
Looks like we have another one. MG Marcus, is it?
Go ahead. Oh, Mike isn't picking up. Okay, Mark. Well, we'll circle back around. If you'd like, you could put your comments in the comment box, and I can try reading them. And we can go from there. Okay, others. Let's see if I see another camera on. And you know, it's interesting. The last comment, I absolutely relate to it, and that having a script is helpful, and calling on people. I think one thing that's associated with COVID is all the etiquette that we used to follow, that we knew we needed to do when we met in person. It's kind of gone out the window. So there's more social anxieties, I think, and how do I do this and how do I navigate it? And I think that's a really great point to have, that to guide discussion can be really helpful. Let's see. Okay, Mark, I can see that your camera's on.
So can you hear me now? I had to change my headset.
Yes. Oh, fantastic. You did it. You're here and we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's an issue with a Bluetooth headset that I have. It's not fine-tuned into the computer. But Mark Reed, I'm a senior planner with the City of St. John. And one of the things that we've noticed, particularly with our PAC meetings, is we've turned off the chat, because a lot of the times that offline or that chat can get distracting, and it's our chair compared it to the equivalent of somebody shouting from the gallery, right? So you know, we just follow an orderly process where we have speakers register to speak, and then, you know, once we've gone through the list, we ask if there's anybody else who has dialed in, either through a computer or on the phone, that would like to address the committee and go from there. But you know, we found the chat function distracting, so our current practice has been, and we've evolved it, you know, since we started here about a year or so ago. Our practice today is to basically turn that chat off prior to the public meeting.
That's good. How about others? Have you? I guess, Mark, this was like a municipal council meeting, I assume you're talking about.
Yeah, it would be our planning advisory committee. So they have their jurisdiction is to rule on certain applications and then make a recommendation to municipal council on others. So, you know, it is part of that public process, but again, you know, we feel that, you know, giving folks the ability to appear by phone and video and then turning the chat off so the meeting doesn't, you know, go down a rabbit hole works a lot better on our end.
Good, good. I'm curious to see if others, is this your practice in your council or when you interact with the public? I'm particularly interested in hearing of those more specific public meetings where there's perhaps an issue or there's something that needs to be approved, where it's perhaps outside of council, where certainly in councils you have a lot of control. But have you had that experience? What's worked? What have the challenges been?
And again, yeah, to raise your hand, go ahead and turn your camera on. I'll watch for you and call on you. It's a good question, Dave. And if you're at home in your sweatpants or your pajamas and turning your camera on isn't an option, please go ahead and message in the message box, and we can share that way as well.
So Susan, I'm not seeing a lot of comments at this point, so maybe I can move on to the next part of the presentation.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. So next slide, and next slide, please. So I've laid out kind of some of the challenges for online facilitation, and thank you for those who have shared your experience. Now I'm going to try to share, or I'm going to share the best practices, what I've seen for online facilitation. And so next slide, please. So I want to stress that what I'm seeing, and perhaps what you're seeing, is that online facilitation requires a new team. And it's a facilitator, it's a presenter, an online platform manager, and a note taker. And I think Gordon was sharing that with us. So each one has a specific job to do. And again, early days, a year ago, we were feeling our way through, and often it was the facilitator that kind of ran the presentation, managed the technology, and so on, helping the presenter. That became quite difficult to deal with. I remember we talked to a number of our clients and said, oh my goodness, these are a whole bunch of new people. It's going to cost a lot more money. And really it doesn't, because you know, we don't have to travel anymore. We can prepare a lot more efficiently. Note takers, the notes can be taken a lot more efficiently as well. So it's a new team, and we want to always make sure our clients understand that. Online facilitation also requires a different philosophy. So there's always a temptation of kind of going to the technology and seeing what you can do first. But the best practice I've seen is focusing on the meeting you want rather than the meeting that the technology makes convenient. So at some time you do need to do a deep dive into a number of issues. You need to do a lot of probing of particular comments and so on. And so that is what you want to get. So you need to find the technology to support that. Use the comment that it's intention first and mechanism second, not about the tools, it's about the pedagogy. Now, I did search for an example of somebody who, in doing some research, who shared that they had the best meeting they ever had. And next slide, this is what I found. I'll let you read that. So there are different measures of what a good meeting is about. Let me, though, go into a little depth here. Next slide, please. So some of the best practices, certainly find a quiet work area to avoid those distractions. You know, as Susan mentioned, we all have had kids, dogs, others on the call. And if you're like me, when you are on a call and you see somebody else, the first thing you want to do is to check out, okay, what books do they have on their shelf? What room are they in? How are they dressed? What's on their desk? And so those are all that make meetings interesting, of course, but particularly if you're facilitating, they're a bit distracting. I always use kind of a white background, and I find that keeps everybody focused. Ground rules, which I talk in the book about quite a bit, are still helpful. I want people to be respectful and cooperative, so I'll usually do that in a very subtle way. Again, with online facilitation, you can be a lot more, I guess, deliberate in terms of if people are not responding appropriately. There's a lot of ways to address that, more than face-to-face meetings. But I always wanted to do that. I believe as Gordon was mentioning about, or Mark perhaps, about how to coordinate among the team when there's a lot happening. And I've had a client recently, again, it was a large meeting where they actually had Teams up in the background, and the whole project team was in Teams. They allowed me as the facilitator to monitor the chat in Teams, but the public was on Zoom, so they put Zooms over top Teams. And we basically had two platforms running at once. So when a member of the public asked a question, I could see the team working to find out, okay, who's the right person to ask that question? What are the elements of the question that need to be answered, and so on. So it was a communication to me as a facilitator to allow that response to be fully thought through. When I do team face-to-face meetings, as I talk about in the book, it's always a challenge because if I have 250 people in the room and there's 6-10 hands up, the questions are coming in fairly fast. Every time a question comes in, I have to look to the project manager or the team leader, and they have to think about who's going to answer that. So there's this really quick interaction through body language and others to get the right person to answer that particular question. So it does allow that to be much more efficient. It doesn't always happen all the time. The next one is, the last point is, again, whether we use the Q&A function rather than the chat or hands up. So we've already had some comment on that. The advantage of the Q&A is that all the questions and discussion occurs in one spot, and those questions can be shared with participants. I've also found that sometimes when a presenter is answering verbally, sometimes the team members will be answering in chat, and there'll be two different answers going out there, which is very confusing for the public. And for note taking, again, in terms of efficiency, when you have people writing into chat, it's or the QA function, it's very easy to keep notes. So again, one recent facilitation, we just copied everything in chat and use that as the notes because it's pretty clear. Next, please. So on that, again, I'm looking forward to hearing your examples of best practices. There are online facilitation tools that can be used. I think it's probably too early to be using that with large groups, but as life goes on and who knows how long COVID is going to be, I think there'll be a gradual uptake in how members of the public become perhaps more comfortable with these online facilitation groups. We know that as our work groups, we can use breakout groups and techniques that are a little more complex, flip charts, whiteboards, online polling, and so on. But again, they're very tough for large, particularly angry meetings. Perhaps that will change. When you do use whiteboards and flip charts, it really requires the facilitator to be quite nimble. And so on top of everything else you're doing when you're monitoring the meeting, you have to know your skills on flip charts and whiteboards quite well. Again, I try to avoid that. Another really good part of the chat function is that you can provide deeper information immediately to the member of the public by, say, cutting and pasting email addresses, web links, YouTube videos, surveys, and so on. And I saw this work really well when I was facilitating a meeting with a very complex topic, and the public was really good there, but they were really probing. So a member of the team was saying, okay, here's this report said, and in chat you're hearing, okay, well, what's that report? And automatically somebody just put the link there to the report and a few other occasions. So it helped the public to learn a lot deeper, which I thought was really good. So in terms of the tools and picking tools, it's early days, but I think you obviously for the types of meetings that I deal with, you need to gauge the level of emotion, and it's really harder for when there's a lot of anger. Next, please. As I said, I'm not a technical expert in the supportive technologies, however, I've used a number of them. I just wanted to kind of go through some of these. Most of these supports for online facilitation have free trials and demos, so I suggest give them a try. This presentation will be available after, so you can kind of Google them and give them a try. As I said, the public may be more accustomed to these in the future, and I'd like to hear from anybody who's tried them. But with Google Mural, it's really good for, say, strategic planning if you're dealing with a public group. It's good for SWOT, and also managing stakeholder expectations. So there's some good tool for that. Lumio is good for making decisions together. Lots of good group facilitation tools and getting feedback on ideas if you want to kind of float an idea out and see how the public responds to it. Miro is better for online visual collaboration. So if you have a group that's probing or trying to do some design or help to do some planning and so on through sharing ideas, Miro seems to be pretty good. It has good whiteboards and flip charts. It allows for concept maps, and it also allows for storytelling by users, like member of the public. Sometimes when I facilitate groups, if somebody's got a story to tell that will help inform a decision or to help people learn about what happens on the land or in a policy or a situation, Miro is good for allowing that storytelling. And Padlet is really good for visualizing issues. So it's pretty simple to use. So you come up with, say, a set of ideas, you can post those, everybody sees each one's ideas, and you can distill that and come up with issues. It's also good for SWOT, and as I said, it was pretty simple. Next, please. Just a couple techniques as I move towards the last couple slides here, but I always found it to be quite helpful of having a parallel method of contacting tech people if needed during the presentation. Often we'll have folks that just their sound isn't working or something like that, and you do need that communication just to get their support while you're facilitating. Sharing the PowerPoint and other information ahead of time with your team members is also important. You always want to have backup. I call it the belt and suspenders approach, so that, yeah, you can upload your information, but if that day I just happen to have an excavator in the front row tearing up, cable lines, it ain't going to work. So I need to make sure there's a second or third way of getting the information up online. And finally, sharing talking points. Actually, I've got a couple more. I'm sharing talking points in case you're shut out. So for this particular presentation, we went through it once in advance so that Susan and others knew what I was going to be saying, just in case. Next, please. Advanced planning of meetings. For the larger projects, we always do that. So we have the team come together, we run through everything. Even for our face-to-face meetings, we do that. I talk about that a lot in the book. And in fact, as a facilitator, about 90% of the work that you do occurs before the meeting, working with a team, making sure everybody's on base and knows what to do. And I think it was either Gordon or Mark talked about kind of the choreographing of a really good tight presentation. So that happens in bed. Now, in terms of prompt questions are kind of the golden questions that get the information out from the public that you want. So that needs to be thought through. A meeting I'm doing next week, the team has already met, and these are the 6 questions we want to ask the public, and will help to get us information we need. Now, the facilitator does need to work harder to understand the nonverbal part of the meeting. So you do need to pay close attention to facial expression or silence or what's going on, or many people turning their screens off. And I had one meeting probably about 3 months ago where the client brought in probably 20 consultants to hear something that we all knew, and but we were required contractually to listen to a presentation of about an hour. It was a bit embarrassing because everybody turned their screen off from the first second, and almost nobody to the very end of the hour turned their screen on. And it got to a point where the presenter was pleading with everybody to please somebody turn your screen on. I don't know if everybody's doing emails while it was going on or not, but they eventually I turned my screen on because I'm pretty soft and was empathetic. So one more person did as well, but that was a bit, it was telling when people will turn their screens on. Next slide, please. So what can we do? Last couple of slides here. What can we do to improve dialogue? First of all, virtual meetings are really busy environments. So there's a lot going on, particularly if you have everything turned on. So again, the facilitator needs to be focused on facilitation. The presenter needs to be free to present. So the beginning of the meeting is also important. In the book, I talk a lot about setting the tone. And so I'll particularly if there's things a little bit thorny and I want people to, see everybody else as a human being, I'll sometimes leave it on for about 10 minutes before the formal start. We'll talk about gardening or sports or the weather or something like that, just so that there's a bit of chat and people can see it as everybody's a human being, and also helps to set the tone. So as a facilitator, of course, I want to set that tone and make sure that we expect dialogue and listening and so on. Next, please. A couple practical things. Again, I think, as you probably all know this by this point, need to get online a good amount of time ahead of time. Monitoring whether key team members are having access problems and for example, having a mic, a phone, another phone on at the same time, you're going to get feedback. Practice uploading presentations and not assuming that participants have information in advance, and to make sure that they have it so that they can be good participants. I know when I have people on the phone, in some instances, I will make sure that I almost do descriptive video of what's happening on the slide, and people on the phone will not be able to see the questions. So I will reread the questions so that I really focus on that one person who's not getting in, but has something to say. It may be a little bit inconvenient for those who are, but I want to make sure everybody gets involved in the meeting. Next, please. Next slide, thanks. I came across a really good chart that kind of laid out the platforms on the left-hand side, and then on the top axis, it kind of laid out what each platform allows, and I put a source there. And so it is interesting. We started with Skype a year ago, and we've abandoned it. It just was so difficult to work with. Again, I'd like to hear from you as to whether Skype is working or not, or others. We use Teams an awful lot. Certainly we use Zoom an awful lot, GoToMeeting today. So there's better or worse. I'd love to hear from you as to what you're using more frequently in terms of engaging the public, and so on. So I'm at the end. Next slide, please. So some of the questions that I'd like to ask you is kind of what online techniques have you successfully used and you want to share with us today? What's worked for you? If you have some insight, I'd love to hear it. How best do we continue to improve online dialogue? We may be at this for some time. What do we need to continue to improve? And is this the new normal? Even if we do kind of address the pandemic, are we going to be at this for some time regardless? So I'd love to hear your ideas. I also included a slide after this, which I won't show, but it has a bunch of references from really good articles, learning articles. With that, Susan, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Okay, all, we'll turn it over to you. So if you turn your camera on, I'll understand that you have a comment to make or an idea to share. We would love to hear from you. And I would just like to note that Dave did practice what he preaches in preparing for this presentation. We were laughing about that you're all watching these points in action. We did meet early. Dave did share his presentation. We have Dylan with API currently running the slideshow, so it's been fun seeing this actually happen. It really does help with just feeling good when you're about to start a presentation to kind of know all the ducks are in line. So yeah, let's see here. I think I've got a comment here. Okay, so Tracy shared a tool I think that's quite helpful. So it's in the comment section to everybody. It sounds like ideaboards.com. It's an online sticky note form, which you can vote on. Has anybody else tried that one? Oh, okay, I see a camera on. All right. Oh, Tracy, great. Hello. So we'll get you to, let's do the same thing as we did the last session. Get you to introduce yourself, say where you are and where you're working, and then share with us. Please go ahead. And we may well have, are you possibly on mute? This is the you're on mute edition all, so if you start on mute, that is okay. I feel like you're doing what the instructions guided you to do. Oh, headset, okay. So I'm still unable to hear you. Are you speaking now? Raise your, oh,
Yeah.
I think we've got
Yep.
you.
There we
Okay,
go.
go ahead. Yes.
No, the sound works, but not. Yeah, I have my other screen on. I should know.
It's
Tracy
nice to
Wade.
see you, Tracy. Hello.
I'm in Sackville, and I work for the province of New Brunswick, and I work on a couple of other projects as well throughout the Atlantic region. One of the things that I ended up doing earlier this winter is I worked for a nonprofit group actually, and we were trying to do some strategic planning. So the idea boards was a neat thing. So it's basically it's like sticky notes, so anyone can put them up once the host has them. So I used them in a facilitating session, and people would give me their answers to whatever questions. I'd put the sticky notes up. You could also vote on them as well, so it's almost like a democracy type approach as well. And then at the end of the session, I was able to actually email the link to everyone that participated and to those people that couldn't participate, and they could add their own sticky notes and then vote on things as they wanted. So I left it open for a couple of weeks. So it was an interesting one, and it was really easy, and it was free.
And did it help you learn a lot more about, or the group learn a lot more by doing that?
It was because it was a kind of a strategic type planning thing. So it wasn't an angry mob. I was not dealing with that. It was a bunch of very nice people who were just trying to figure out where to go next with their organization. It was a way that everybody could see the notes and kind of think through. There was a series of questions that I asked, and I did it for multiple working groups out of this committee. So at the end of the day, you could see everybody's comments to the same questions, but from different perspectives. So I think it was quite helpful. They told me it was, and it felt like, and it made kind of setting out a new direction easier on my end at the end of the day.
Excellent. Thank you. Folks, I'm wondering, I'll pose another question, but I don't know if we're going to have wave 9 or wave 12 or what, but if virtual engagement is going to be around for a long while, how, I'm assuming, as planners and professionals, this isn't the start. We probably are going to see a lot more need for training, not only as a professional, but also with the public and so on. I don't know, am I off track here, or are everybody confident that we'll all get vaccinated and we'll all be back to face?
Now, while everyone mulls over that question, another comment did come in from David Patterson. Does it work, Dave? I'll share that. And then we'll circle back around to your question once we've had a chance to think about it.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, David. David Patterson noted, Mentimeter is a good platform for real-time polling, and the results are graphically appealing. And Google Jamboard is another one for sticky notes.
Excellent.
And let's see. Oh, okay, Gordon, I see that you've turned your camera on. Do you have something to add to David's comment?
Just to respond to David's question. It's interesting because we did new counselor training. So I guess first of all, I'll introduce myself because I didn't the first time. So Gordon Smith, yeah. I'm in Halifax. I'm with the Department of Municipal Affairs in the provincial government. And it was interesting. That was an online session where we did new counselor training for counselors who were elected last fall. And they use Zoom as the main interface because of, I think, the chart you showed how you could kind of break out rooms and do a lot of things. But there was a full-time facilitator. There was a lot of texting going on in the background as questions were asked and things like that. So they didn't have a separate platform going. They used text on their phones to kind of interact between each other as they ran into things. I think in terms of the question, is this going to continue? I think absolutely it's going to continue. Certainly from our side, looking at it and trying to have engagement sessions throughout the province, simultaneously, it's reduced travel. It makes it a lot easier for people to participate because they don't have to drive 4 or 5 hours to come to a central location for a session. And I think, so I think it's going to continue. So I think getting trained well on how to do it and how to make those sessions work is going to be key, because I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. I'm sensing that we're just kind of at the very beginning of a new way of communication. I shouldn't say new way of communication, but a new public, say, professional, political interaction. So we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us. That would be my view.
Okay, do we have others? Don't be shy to turn your camera on. Or again, the chat function absolutely works. We didn't turn off the chat function for this one, and everyone's been very respectful, so that's a win. It remains an option.
Where's everybody at in terms of, obviously I've heard from a couple of people that are very capable on online engagement and trying new tools and so on. But if we were, though, to take a poll of all of us on the call, are we still feeling our way through, or do you feel that most of us have at least got to a certain level where we're fluent in at least some of the introductory programs and platforms and so on? Susan, it reminds me of that story of nobody responding.
It's good. We're experiencing it all. Oh, hi. Okay, so we've got Blaine here. And Blaine, how about you introduce yourself again? Say what province you're in, and because we have people from all across the country, and kind of where you're working, what context, what type of institution. Go ahead, Blaine.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm the town planner for Stratford, Prince Edward Island, and it's kind of building upon the last question. I do think online engagement, at least for the next probably year, will be the new normal, but it's also incorporated itself into the way a lot of these meetings manifest. And I have noticed that in some instances, it's actually a little bit more convenient. I guess to add what, I think it was Gordon, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. You just spoke from Halifax, but it's made a lot of these meetings easier. There's less travel time, and it's actually, I think, sometimes meeting space can be an issue. So in this way, that's no longer an issue, because as many people can congregate as need be, and finding meeting space, especially with the time of social distancing, this is making it a lot easier. So I actually see this moving forward, and in the future, after everyone's been vaccinated twice and all that, and we're back to the norm, I could see some people still wanting to choose this method simply because for its convenience.
Do you feel that, just a question to you, do you feel that because of the convenience, we're getting better information from the public, or more public's involved? What are you seeing?
I think we're still in the early stages. I mean, it's been going on for about a year for at least us, in my personal experience, but it's still an ongoing process, an ongoing learning experience. So that remains to be seen. But as anything, as time goes on, there will be improvements and all that, and there will be amenities to aid people. So I think it'll just get easier.
Thank you.
Gordon, did you have a piece to add to that?
Yeah, sorry, and sorry if I'm dominating comments here, but this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and so I'm really delighted with this session. So thanks you for doing it. We've actually found that people who traditionally haven't participated have actually stepped up their participation. Our new counselor training, our participation, I think, tripled with people who took new counselor training, because they could do it online and didn't have to travel. So I think thinking about this as at least a quiver in our toolbox, or a tool in our toolbox of how to reach out to people, I think can really work. And again, like, as you're doing good engagement, you traditionally try to go where people are. So like we've gone to the hockey rinks and to the farmers market and stuff as we're trying to do things. This is also another way to meet people, because we can kind of meet them in their living rooms, right? So I think getting good at this is going to be a good thing, and will let more people and a wider variety of people participate. And and we've seen generational change. Usually we get the old white hairs, such as myself, as a lot of the people coming out. And I think with our online engagement pieces that we've done, we've seen a lot younger demographic actually participate. So I view it as really positive.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gordon. I've talked to a lot of my planning colleagues who all of a sudden they're getting a lot more people interested in their projects than they would ever get otherwise. So they're quite thrilled that that's happening.
Okay, well, we have 2 or 3 minutes to go, and it'd be wonderful. I just saw Brian White. Thanks for turning your camera on. I see you have comments, so we'll get you again to introduce yourself and say where you're working from and who you're working for. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. I'm Brian White. I'm with the town of Rothesay in New Brunswick. And my comment is very much just a very mundane, practical one. In that is, this platform is primarily an audio platform. A lot of people don't use their camera. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of people don't use headsets. Gordon, he's been on with a headset and audio quite clear. Dave, as a presenter, you're in a room that's quite echoey. And it's very hard to maintain or sustain attention to an audio platform that has a lot of echo in it. And I think a lot of people simply will sign off when it becomes taxing to listen. So if we treat this more like a radio platform than a video platform and really focus on the audio quality, I think to a large degree we can really improve the platform. I've been on lots of Zoom calls, way too many Zoom calls over the last year, and just struggled to actually listen to the content of what the presenters are saying, because they're in a room that's either they don't have a good speaker system or there's quite a lot of echo. Not to pick on you, but you're in a room that has a lot of echo in it. So that's just simply my my comment on that. Thanks.
Great feedback. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My headset's across the room, and there's part of me that just wanted to dart and put it on. So thank you. Noted. Well, now, Dave, I think at this point I'm going to get ready to wrap it up because we're rounding up to 3:30. Any last points before I say closing comments?
No, just thank you, everybody. It's I guess the intent is to make sure that we share as much information as possible with each other as professionals, and I'm really happy that you've asked me to come back a second time and share some additional thoughts. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay, so with that, we'll bring things to a close. I think just a couple points I thought just were wonderful with that, turning on the cameras, introducing everybody, putting in that extra effort to get to know the participants on a call. And Brian, point well taken, making sure you can hear them well. And then I really like the point about deciding what it is you want to do and then find the technology that will allow you to do it. So really enjoyed your presentation, Dave. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise. And a really big thank you to all who took the time to join us today. It was wonderful to spend this afternoon with you, and a very happy Friday moving forward. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.